I didn't know that was actually going to be the working title, or I would have, tried harder. So I put a subtitle to make it a little more interesting. I have some products that I've made here, and thus the hooker joke, But in any case, I realized that this is a group that's about things like, websites and ebooks and things that are not manufactured products necessarily. And at first it made me a little uneasy to be talking to a group like this, but at the same time, I think there's some things you ought to know about, the dark side of the economy, the old Rust Belt stuff. And the reason is because, I'll get to that in a minute. That's a reason. That's a reason why we want to know about how to do this. I love these little guys. Anyway, when you sell an ebook, there's a lot of work that goes up front. I'm sure some people here have done that. But when you sell that 10,000th ebook, boy, that's sweet because that's 100% profit. There's nothing like it. We can't quite match that, but I can tell you that you can come close, because if you have a product, what kind of opportunities are we talking about here? Let's look at this. I pulled this yesterday off of Amazon, the thumb thing. It's so you can hold a book in one hand, you put the thumb thing on your thumb, it holds the book open, you don't lose your page. Okay, apparently they're selling a few of these. $10.05. I roughly figured out that's probably made of polyethylene, which is, X cents a pound. And they're probably, I took some guesses about how they're making it, and I came up with a relative cost. Now I want you to remember their selling price here, okay? That's your cost. I could make those for a dime all day long, I guarantee you. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into the price as far as the kind of tooling and this and that, but still, you're talking about 10 cents to 10 bucks. Now, let's see. I've carefully calculated the percentage. And anyway, so where do you sell something like this? Well, the thing is, there's any number of places. The obvious places are eBay and Amazon. Most people that go to Amazon and eBay, they find stuff in thrift stores. They drop ship from other manufacturers. If they're really bold and crazy, they'll buy a load of stuff from China. And there's some problems with all that. And the biggest one is you don't have any control. You have no idea how many other people are selling the same thing. On Amazon, apparently getting the buy box is a big deal. I'm not yet on Amazon, but I'm hoping to. And if you have your own part number, but it's the same essentially part as what other people have or very similar, then you don't have any competition. You get the buy box because you're the only one, okay? Now, that is the kind of opportunity I'm talking about today. The other thing is there's any number of other places that you can sell something. I've been known to go through Home Depot and Walmart and say, good Lord, this little plastic thing that hangs on a paintbrush or whatever is selling for $1.79, and it's made in Mexico to make it cheaper, and I can make it for 4 cents because it's only half the size of that other thing. Good Lord. And now I realize it's not so easy to go knock on a Walmart door and say, hey, I got an idea. It's not quite that simple. But there are places where you can. You can start out selling in maybe even a local Walmart or a local hardware store or a local any kind of store to see if some of whatever product you're interested in has any takers. And you don't have to invest a lot of money to begin, and that's kind of what this is about. If you're starting a business, there's always a lot of upfront costs. Part of success in being in a business is to manage those costs. Now, I can't tell you how to do that and everything else other than use the people around you, because I'm using Cliff for phones, I'm using Carol for a website, so I have that benefit, but certainly keeping those costs down is necessary to end up here, which is where we're all heading, except with two eyes, not the one probably. In my previous life, previous incarnation, I used to be a manufacturer's rep. I'd go around, travel all the time at my own expense, my own car, my own gas, covered Ohio, Western Pennsylvania. If I sold $1 million worth of stuff, and that's a lot of stuff, I'd make $50,000, 5%. And they always said, well, that's great, Al, but that was last year. What are you gonna do this year? I mean, it's like, none of that counts. So in any case, there were so many times that I took a line of product, and most of what I sold was custom. In other words, custom made plastic, rubber, steel parts. So I know something about that because I had to learn it that way. But in any case, there's this tendency when somebody starts to pay you $5, $10, heaven forbid, $15,000 a month, and then the president of the company looks at his paycheck and he looks at yours and he says, this isn't good. And next thing you know, you've lost the line. They've put a direct sales guy in who they're paying less money to. He's already got the territory developed, and you're out on the street. So I decided not to go to bed angry. So I plotted revenge. Initially, it was revenge to sell their product, but that was easier said than done because it was a complex product. So I started asking people if they had a need. What parts?
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
And go back just when you were talking about your margin of profit.
Yeah.
Did you figure in those little plastic things, either the hook or whatever, going in and getting a patent and having to then go through that process of intellectual?
I'm assuming that there's no patent on the thumb thing. Some things are patentable, some things are not.
Is there a guideline that you can offer to us as to what we should worry about protecting as to the intellectual property, and what we should just say, what the hell, let's go ahead, produce it, and
I'd be happy to address that. This particular hook evolved from one that did not have this little doodad on the bottom, and it's designed to go over a work belt, okay? In particular, an electrical lineman's work belt. Now, it's a real pain if this should come off by being brushed with branches or whatever, because they have to go all the way down to the ground to get it again. They might be up in the air pretty good. So we came up with this, and in fact, let me step back. We initially had somebody say, is there a way you can keep it on the belt? Okay? And I thought, I'll think about that. And I did. Of course, I didn't come up with anything, but I thought of it. The guy who asked me for it said, he was a customer. And he said, could we put maybe a hole through here? Now we could put like a pin or something that would lock it on, so as long as the pin's in there, it won't come off. I said, yeah, you could do that. He said, do you have a drawing of the parts you could send me, and I'll tell you where I want to put the hole. And I foolishly, said, yeah, okay. So I sent him of course, anybody could make a drawing from this. That's no big trick. So I sent him the drawing. An unusually long time went by before he reordered. So I went to follow up with him, and we don't need any yet. We don't need it. Finally, I went to his website, and I see one of these in green. It's got a hole in it right here. I said, "Why, you gosh darn son of a gun." So, in any case, yeah, okay, that's not what I really said, but that's exactly what we're talking about here. Now, that's not a patentable item. It's been around, 40 years. So there's no protection. The only protection you have on an item that's not patentable is to make it so cheaply that you could drive the guy out of business. For example, I make this in a single cavity mold because I probably sell maybe 10,000 of these a year, which, you know, that's nice business for me, but IBM's not very interested, you know. So if I had made this, and by the way, in a single cavity mold, the cost is, shall we say, between 50 cents and $1 a piece. If I'd made this in a 2-cavity mold, it probably would cost me 35 or 40 cents, 50 cents at the most. If I made it in a 4-cavity mold, I could probably get these for a quarter. And then I would have locked that guy out because he's not going to make a 4-cavity mold, not for something in that quantity. A 4-cavity mold's got a production capacity of probably 250,000 parts a year. Why would you make a 4-cavity mold to make this? It's 10,000 a year to get the price down. That's why. Now you got a new problem. The new problem is on a 4-cavity mold, it only takes about 12 minutes to run all the parts you need. And so the molder's not too excited about doing it. But it is a defensive method that you can use to lower your cost to the point that other people aren't interested. And that other guy is still out there, but he doesn't have the lock on his because, well, mine's patent pending. And I understand I'm going to get the patent, so here. So I get to sue the pants off him if he does. So anyway, basically I've taken his business, but that's about all the protection there is. You can go for a provisional patent, by the way, which is not really a patent. A provisional patent is, I intend to patent this. And it is protection for maybe a year. And if you don't file in a year, it's gone. On the other hand, if somebody else is looking at this and they see patent pending, they're going to think twice about copying it. So I hope I've addressed your question, but maybe I over-addressed it, but there we are. Okay, so this guy, getting back to this guy says, yeah, I got a problem with this hook. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, it always breaks at this thin spot, which happened to be right where the round meets the flat. And so I said, okay, I'm such a wonderful engineer. By the way, I'm not an engineer. I carefully calculated if you made the thin spot thicker, it wouldn't break there. And lo and behold, it turned out to be true. So I made him a part that didn't break. I made it with the cheapest mold I could find. Cheap. I mean, even 20 years ago it was cheap. I think it was $1,400. And I sold that particular guy 600 parts, which was not a lot of parts, and it didn't pay for the mold. But in 2 years it would, and there's other people. So I thought, you know, this is worth taking a shot at. The same thing, the other thing is that once you get into one guy, whatever business he is in, they have other parts. They have in yellow, they have in orange, they have the one that's got the belt lock on it and the whole thing. And so while you're doing that, then the next thing is, well, okay, what else you got? Well, it turns out they have some other parts that happen to be hooks too, thus the Happy Hooker line. These all go to the same market. When you're going to the same market, your marketing cost is really low. And typically, you will find that in a market for blank product, that there's 3 or 4 big distributors around the country, and there's like 3 dozen little ones that half of them don't pay their bills. Guess who you sell to? That's right, you sell the big ones. Not always easy. I'm selling all the largest manufacturers or distributors in this, and there's 4, well, except for the one that made it himself. But he's going to send him to economic hell, I hope. In any case, so when you get started with something, in my case, the marketing that I do is to find a little opening wedge and just keep prying that sucker open as quick as you can and always keep some pressure on it. The cost of doing this, when you find an opportunity, and it could be as simple as walking down the aisle at some drugstore or anywhere, any store, is the tooling. Now, my experience has been primarily in plastics and in extrusions and in molding. Now, extrusions are where you essentially put plastic into a machine that melts it, and with a screw it applies pressure and turns it as it melts and pushes out a hole through a hole in a plate that if it was just a hole, you would be making now a rod. So it's just a continuous rod. You can make it 20 miles long if you wanted to. You can also make a shape that's not a rod, like a tube, by blocking the middle, or you can make it a C shape or whatever. And plastic extrusions are all around us. They're in every door seal, and they're in cars, or every kind of weather strip has them. They're everywhere. Those, the tooling typically runs from a low of $500 to a high of $2,000, unless it's something incredibly fancy, but that's the normal range. Injection molds are a different thing. They are the expensive ones. The first guy who quoted this hook with the clip quoted me $7,500. And that price was not a terrible price. It was a kind of like the other guy's price. I had one guy here that quoted me $2,500, and I got a price from China for $1,800, and I decided for that little bit of difference I'd rather buy in the US, so I did. Now, I have bought in China, and by the way, just as a quick aside, if I buy the mold in China, I bring it to a mold shop in the United States, and the first thing I say is, check it, and if you need to fix it, do it now. Because there's they know what they're doing, but there's misunderstandings. There's all kinds of things that can happen. Okay, so in any case, I got that started. A point about the manufacturers. One of the reasons to use manufacturers, even domestic manufacturers, is because they typically make a margin of maybe 20%. And that's what they make. Now, the guy who's molding that thumb thing, he would kill to be the guy with it on Amazon, but it's not his product, probably. Probably somebody went to him and said, hey, how much to make this? And they said, I think I can do that for $10. And he says, okay, let's go. And he sells it for $10, and the rest is, history. If you can invent something, if you can improve on something, if you look at a thumb thing as kind of a dumb product as that is, and try it and say, gee, that'd be better if it was rounded here and something else there, look and see if it's patented. If it's not, go for it, because there are ways to get that mold for something small like that very, very inexpensively. Factories are loving chances to sell something like that on Amazon, but for the most part, they're oriented towards making stuff and not oriented towards selling stuff. So they're not so good at it for the most part. But we can take advantage of that, and that's why it's better to use a factory than to own one. Okay. I talked a little bit about how you make these things. My experience is rubber and plastic and metal, castings, forgings, extrusions, molded parts. Extruding is like making spaghetti, steel plate with holes in it. Most costly is the mold. Least costly extrusion or pressure. Now, there are 100 different processes, and I'm not going to try to cover them all here. If anybody wants to ask me how something is made, I'll be happy to answer it. But, we can't turn this into a one-week seminar. Okay, so if you're looking at a product, you got to pick a process. If it's a part that's long, it's probably made by extrusion. They push it through a die, it gets long, they cut it off at whatever length is right. They can do that with aluminum, with rubber, with plastic. They can even do it with steel, although that's tougher. If it's a shape in one piece, it's probably molded. If you don't have any idea, then call somebody in the industry, like, if it's a rubber part, call up the XYZ rubber company and say, I'd like to talk to you about making a part for me. Okay? Don't call up and say, hey, I'm a housewife and I don't know anything about this and I don't have any money, but I'd really like to waste an hour of your time, they're probably not going to see you. But if you say, I have a part that I want to look into having made, can I come and see you for a few minutes, or could we, go to lunch or something? And if you go to lunch, you buy, all right? People will help you. People generally are nice as long as you don't abuse their time too much. And if somebody looks at that and says, well, that's not an extrusion, that's a molded part, we only do, whichever one it is, then you say, can you tell me who would be good at doing this? And they will give you a referral 9 times out of 10, okay? This is where the big money is. This is an injection mold. These two halves fit together, one on top of the other. They open, they close, and parts come out. This is a 2-cavity mold, and it takes very little longer for the machine to close and open for 2 cavities than it does for 1. That's why a 2-cavity mold makes a part more cheaply than a 1-cavity mold does. Everything, and this is kind of unique to the molding industry, everything is based on the machine time. Now, you would think that since all pricing, like for instance, if it takes 30 seconds to cycle a part, then you're going to make 2 a minute. So you're going to make 120 an hour. Well, if your machine time is $120 an hour, obviously that's $1, and if it's a single cavity, that's towards 1 part. If it's 2 cavity, that's 50 cents each. That's why 2 cavities is better than 1, and 4 is better than 2, and 8 is better than 4, but it gets to be a limit because if you don't have the quantities to justify it, nobody wants to run it. So in any case, this is your 2-cavity mold. How it works is honestly at this point not terribly important, except that they do, and they make wonderful parts, and they are very expensive. And if you have a part that's going to be requiring this kind of a mold, you probably, unless you got the money, you might need a partner, or you certainly need to be sure you're going to be able to sell it.
Can I ask you a question? I'm just
Sure, go ahead.
I'm just really curious. What is that mold for?
I got it off the internet. I don't have the slightest idea.
Because I'm thinking 25,000 to 65,000 for a mold.
Oh, yeah.
So that must make some kind of a metal or steel product, is that right?
No, this is to make plastic parts.
That's
You see,
to make a plastic part.
here's the thing. This mold, again, I got it off the internet, so I don't know exactly the size. I'm guessing it's probably this long by,
Oh.
this wide by, that long. And it's maybe that deep. They cut these out of solid blocks of steel, not just any steel,
Okay.
the chromium tool steel that's very hard.
Okay.
Like we use P20 for our stuff. It's a generic tool steel, but it's still, tool steel costs more than, that's probably 2 or 3 times as much as regular steel. Plus you have all this machining.
Is that like injection molding?
This is for injection molding, exactly. So if you get into a big project for something like this, you're probably talking big money. If you're going to sell 150,000 parts a year and you're going to make $2 a piece, hey, it's not a problem, except getting the money in the first place. But business-wise, it makes sense. That isn't always the case. By the way, are there any other questions before I go to the next thing? No? Okay. There are things you can do to save money. Number one, you can get a 2-cavity price by taking 1 cavity of one thing and 1 cavity of something similar, like the one that doesn't have, and running them together. Now I'm getting a 2-cavity mold price. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is you can make this fancy tool steel mold out of aluminum. It's not going to last that long usually. There are people that specialize in running aluminum tools, but they run them very slowly and very carefully, so you generally don't get the piece price that you would get on a standard mold. There are other things that people can make molds out of that don't last that long, but they're cheap to get you started. Yes?
Al, if you're going to run a two-cavity mold with two different parts, the parts need to be similar in size?
That's a good question. We quoted a part that involved a flat bottom for a oval basket it was 1/8 of an inch thick all the way around, so it was a lot of plastic. And then we had another part that was a ring that went around the top of that same basket, but it was empty in the middle. So one weighed like 5 times as much as the other. There is an issue with that, and it's called mold balancing, because the mold kind of goes ka-chunk when you've got all this pressure on one side, because that cavity is already full, but the plastic is still pushing into it. And on the other side, the cavity is not full, the pressure is lower because the flow is still going in. That can be managed, and it's worth doing if you can. If there is, it's something you got to talk to your molder about it. Like, if he feels confident in doing it, then go for it. But it's something you should look into for sure. It can save you a lot of money. Go ahead.
So do the places that make these molds, is it the same companies, the manufacturers, or do you outsource the mold to China?
Great
and then
question.
you take it to a company, you say, here's my mold, make this for me.
No. See, if you do the here's my mold, make it for me thing, anything that goes wrong is your fault, okay? You want to avoid that. What you want to do is you want to find a molder, a guy that runs the machines that makes the parts, that is reputable, whose prices are at least competitive. You don't always need to go to the lowest price guy. You need to go to a good guy who's competitive. That's your guy. And then let him buy the mold for you. Usually they mark them up very little, if at all. And yet they will charge a little for trying them out and so on. And if they try it out and they have to do some things to change it, they usually charge you for that, but it's well worth it, because they're responsible for it. If it doesn't work, it's on them. I have bought molds from China, and that's my deal. I had an engineer, a real engineer, look at it before we sent the drawings over, and I had him look at the mold when it came in, and it was close, but it wasn't quite right. And it cost me about $1,200 to fix it. And so we did that. We did, you know what? We saved so much money going to China, we didn't even tell the Chinese guys about it. Well, we did, but we said, look, we had this and this, and we said, we're just going to fix it, because they gave me such a good price that I was well ahead. And I think the next time I get something from them, I think they'll take really good care of me, because I was reasonable about it. But yeah, you don't want to be the guy responsible for that mold being right. And the molders always have 2 or 3 mold makers that they're close to. They know the guys, they know they're honest, and they know their work. So that's the way to go. Okay? All right. Options as far as saving money. These little guys are called unit cavity molded parts. Typically, you can see by the way they're divided, the center one is actually, I believe that's one mold that's 4 cavities. But the ones on the sides are definitely a large block and a large cavity that's got some of your cavities and some of the other guy's cavities and some of somebody else's cavities. And what they'll do is they'll run nylon in the mold, and you can have any material you want as long as it's nylon. It's like a Henry Ford, any color you want as long as it's black. What they can do is, because nylon is so absorbent of water, if you do want it black, you can drop them into a bucket full of water and dye black, and it'll absorb enough of it, it'll be black. Now, that works great with black. With red, it gets reddish, but it doesn't get, it doesn't get a solid, nice color like this. This is called unit cavity molding or heterocavity molding. Also, there's 3 or 4 companies in Florida that do it. Each one was like an offshoot of the other one. And you can get these things for, like the one little block that's yours, it could be $500 to $2,000. And you know, if it's a gear and it's fancy, you know, it might be, you know, $2,000, $2,500. But compared to the big molds, they're way, way, way cheaper. They're, you know, a fifth cheaper, or a fifth of the cost. You can buy one, you can buy several, and they have different lines where they'll run one in nylon, one in something else. Very often they're bearing materials, which nylon is, because some of these little parts are bearings and gears. They use what they call nylon and acetal for these. That is not usually available for like toy parts, because toy parts vary so much in size. Some are big, some are small, but it is an option. The other option is to use the cheaper process, the extrusion process, to cut parts and make individual parts. Now, I have seen parts like all three of these at one time or another. The rubber ones, little bumpers, maybe on the cupboards or other places, in the car, they have those. Extruded aluminum, I mean, that's sliced off a big long piece of aluminum that looks just like that, the 1-inch slice kind of thing. And then the plastic one, that one is so little, when they extrude that, it's like extruding into a propeller. They call it a fly cutter, and it literally goes around as fast as the propeller does, and those parts just fly out of there. It's just amazing to watch, and they can control it. It's just incredible. Those are very cheap ways to make parts. If you have a part and you can design it to be an extrusion, you will come out ahead. If you're going to sell your idea, sell the product that you want to make, how do you do the show and tell part of this? I mean, you can always make a brochure, you can do an artist rendering, but they don't buy sketches. And I've never been able to sell. I've gotten interest with a sketch, but I've never actually sold anything. You have to make a part. Now, we have the option today of 3D printing that we didn't used to have. And you know what? First one of these, I 3D printed it. Yes. My first PowerPoint, my first 3D print, I've still got first coming every day. I would bring it, except that the mold maker that I sent it to show him how it worked said, oh, like this, and then broke it. So I don't have it anymore, but it did do the job it was intended to do. The other thing is, instead of buying a mold for thousands of dollars and making these in thousands of quantities, you can make a rubber mold for a part just like this and make it in a cast material. And there are various. There's epoxy is a very rock-like hard material. You can use that, but then don't expect it to flex, okay? Polyurethane is a casting material, and you can make that flex a lot like a rubber band, or very little like, I don't know, bumper your car, I guess. It's a very good material for things like this. You can make it any color you want. But instead of this costing you 50 cents or $1, it might cost you $4. Well, you need show and tell parts, that's cheap. And the rubber mold to make it, that might cost you $100. Maybe it's $200, but it's not gonna be thousands. So it's a way to get it out there so that you can get started. And you do have to explain that the production part will be somewhat different in qualities, because if they want to test it and do stuff, it's going to be different. The 3D printing, they still have some limits on the materials they can use. They have limits on the colors they can use. Mine was in white material that was kind of like this material, but not enough that it would bend. That's how it got broken. You can always take a solid block and machine out one of these, but then it'll never quite look like this, you know. So casting is the best way to go. It's cheap. It gives you a show and tell capability. And okay, things to think about. If you buy a mold or other costly tooling, it costs more, yes, but it's also a barrier to entry. Which brings me back to my first version of this that the guy copied with a hole in it. I mean, if I was making these for $0.25 a piece, I could sell them for 50 cents and double my money, and his cost is higher than that. You know, how many is he going to sell? But on the other hand, I'm going to ruin a perfectly good market where people are buying these for a couple of dollars. So there's a trade-off. But it is a barrier to entry to get something that requires a mold. You can make anything in the United States. People talk about the Rust Belt, manufacturing moving out, and so on. That's all true. But if you're assuming that we don't have manufacturing capability here for almost anything you want, you're wrong. Go ahead.
Please expand on the idea of barrier to entry for other people. But it's
What
also
I mean by
barrier-
barriers to
yeah.
entry, if you have a product and somebody says, I like that, I'm going to copy it. If it was a cast product, he could copy it for $100. If it's an injection molded product, it might cost him $5,000 to copy it. That's what I mean by a barrier to entry. The more money he's got to spend, the more time he's going to think about it, right? So that's all. A lot of people are buying from China to take advantage of things like Amazon. I have a feeling raise your hand here if you've thought about selling on Amazon or if you're selling there now. How many people have at least thought about it? A few, okay, good. The people who buy from China, it's always interesting to hear the stories about the first time they did it. And sometimes it's not too pretty. If you must buy from China, it's better if it's their standard product. If it's their standard product, they're selling it not just to you, but lots of other people too. You'll get it on Amazon, they're on Amazon, now you got a price war. Match their price, don't beat it. There's no sense in everybody losing. If it's a novel product like this one, because it has a patent pending, they'll just copy it and steal it. They don't care about the patent. Don't send them a novel product. Buy their standard product or don't buy at all. Also, regarding China, there's 300 million people in the US. 1 in 50 will rob you blind. That's 600,000 robbers in the US, and they're all waiting to talk to you. There's 1.4 billion people in China. That 600,000 is now 14 million. Be careful. Approach them professionally as a company so that the honest companies you do talk to will be willing to deal with you. I have talked to people in China on the phone and by email who I found out later were working out of their mother's basements, but they had a beautiful website. Happens every day. Suggest that you might be selling huge quantities, because you never know, you might be. But if your truthful opinion is you'll be selling far less than that, you got to be an optimist, because it's good to be an optimist, and because if you're not, they won't talk to you. They want to sell lots of everything. That's what they do. Always have 2 or more people quoting if you do go to China, because there's nothing more fun than telling one that he's high. His price is a quarter what the US price is, and telling him he's high compared to the other guy who's only a fifth. If you buy from China, I buy right now from China. I buy from people I know and like. I've never met them in person, but we've done business for years. I pay them 1/3 down, and I'm happy to do it. And that 1/3 down is many thousands of dollars. We started out small. They did what they said they would do. Their products passed the test. And I even knew a guy in Hong Kong who has people that roam around China and do inspections, and he had a guy in this city, and I had him visit the plant. I think it cost me $300 to have him, since he's in the city anyway, stop by and say hello and take a quick look at the plant. And he came back and said, yeah, they're real, so, you know. Some people in China want 100% in advance. Don't do it. 1/3 to 1/2 is normal, but there are now escrow services offered on Alibaba and others to get this done. And they are reliable from what I hear. So otherwise, once they got your money, you got to pray they're not one of the 14 million crooks. Okay. Things I learned along the way. Nobody knows everything, but everybody knows something. Ask lots of questions. People don't mind. If you buy them lunch or bourbon, they mind even less. Budget for your costs. If you have to make a part, say with a cast mold, but that is not the way to make it in the long run, then budget for the cast mold, and if it looks successful, then you can save up and budget for a real mold later. But don't stop. Go ahead. I mean, you could take that thumb thing and you could cast that. It might cost you 75 cents instead of a dime. But you're selling it for 10 bucks. You go, you know. Don't borrow to make products unless you have an order. Seen this happen so many times. Even if you want to get inventory for Amazon and the product is selling. If the product isn't selling enough for you to replenish, you know, larger stores, you're probably not selling it for a high enough price. But, you know, to the extent possible, you want something to be self-financing. And if you do borrow money, you want to at least have a track record of some consistent sales and people who will buy from you on a regular basis. Professional help. Oh, I missed one. Oh yeah, never panic. I do that all the time. Never panic, that is. Panic people make bad decisions. I put a customer into a $120,000 molding program to buy 4 molds to make 4 parts for a well-known company in this area, in fact. And they had a snap involved. As you can see, I like snaps. Small problem. That one didn't work. And I didn't find out until we molded the first parts. Panic. $120,000 of the company's money invested in molds that make parts that don't work. My father pointed out to me, and at that time he said, well, that's why we have a credit line. I thought, yeah, we got a credit line. So now the next step was to see, okay, how can we get rid of the bad snap? What is a good snap we can put in? How can we get it done? And what will it cost? And the bottom line was it ended up costing about $30,000, which was a lot of money, but it made a wonderful part. And it was you know, high clover from then on that one. So, you know, there's going to be times you just need to stop and take a deep breath. Professional help is usually more than you want to pay. It's almost always worth it. I'm using several, right, Carol? It's easier, marketing. It's easier to make and sell a product that someone is already buying that is better or cheaper, so your marketing cost is zip. And the time to get to market is very short also. And once in there, like with my hooks, you can expand and look for other parts they're making and just keep saying, okay, what else, what else, what else? Okay, so anyway, that's my presentation for today. Does anybody have any questions?
And you avoid or skip avoid employees or partners.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble here.
Avoid employees or partners. I'm curious as to why you have that on there.
Yes. Well, I have a talent that I didn't know I had. Apparently, I am the quickest guy in the room to hire a psychopath. I've done it twice. So, yeah, I got it down. If anybody wants one, I got 2 of them I can push you away. Partners aren't always psychopaths, obviously. There are very good partners, but you know, if you have a partner, it's like, you know, if you get married and it doesn't work, you know what you can do. You can get a divorce. There's rules for that. Everybody knows how it works. If you get a partner, you need to make an agreement where if one of us gets unhappy, how can we bring this into 2 pieces so that there's no explosions and flames and fire damage. Partners are okay, but you got to really think about it, and because somebody's going to have the last say, and you have to know who that is. Employees, I haven't had good luck with employees. I have had wonderful luck with outsourced everything, because if you get unhappy with one, you can try somebody else, and there's no downside to it. That's all I meant by that. Let's see. I wanted to, I brought some of these hooks here. One guy, friend of my son, said to me, You know that electrical lineman's hook that they use to carry rope and they put it on their belt? Yeah. Well, I found a good use for that. Really? He says, yeah, I put my power drill in there and I got a big battery in the back and it slams up against it and it stays. It's a perfect tool carrier. I'm on eBay. Tool carrier. You know? And I sold 60 of them on eBay for $6.95 in the following week. If anybody else thinks of a good application for this, I would love to hear about it. In the meantime, I brought a few parts. I think I had initially 10. Some have floated away. That's fine. These are, I intended to leave these here for whoever would like them. So I'll add one more to the stack here too. If you want them, help yourself. If you don't, just leave it, that's fine. So that concludes my presentation, unless there's any further questions. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. Have you utilized the Fab Lab here on the campus at all to try out any ideas? Or
I was not even aware of it.
Oh, okay.
Is that like where they
There
have
is a
3D
Fab Lab.
printers and stuff?
There is a 3D printer. I've never used it or looked into it, but I just was curious.
Is that open for outside people to use?
It's open to
It's
the
free to the
general.
public. It's just certain hours during the day that you can utilize it, and it's usually open maybe.
I
And
appreciate
the summer limited hours, like days and
Fantastic.
evenings. I've utilized it.
Well, you know, it's funny. One of the beautiful things about Lorain Community College is that you have resources here that in many cases are not available anywhere else, and certainly nowhere else nearby. And like making prototypes, boy, in the old days, you know, if you had to take a part with a strange shape and machine it out of a solid block of steel, I mean, Lord, it would take you weeks and cost you thousands and thousands of dollars to make one, because it was just slow going. But now, you know, there's powdered metal, and they even have metal 3D printing now. And there's all kinds of ways to do things, and I'm sure that Fab Lab has some things that I don't know about, and I'd love to hear more about it. It's a beautiful thing. I can't speak highly enough about LCC and the programs you have here. This is just the greatest thing ever. So,
Any other questions? Great.
thank you.